Welcome to this video created by participants in the reading program Suddenly Last Summer, The Effects of Air Conditioning on Louisiana. The Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities administered and partially funded this program in partnership with the St. Tammany Parish Library, City of Covington, Louisiana. The 4 sessions of Suddenly Last Summer was held at the Madisonville Branch of St. Tammany Parish Library in Madisonville, Louisiana from March 5th through March 26th, 2015. The stories told here personalize the historical facts of the development of air conditioning presented in Dr. Raymond Arsenault's article, The End of the Long Hot Summer, published in the Journal of Southern History. A recent summary of this article is available on the LEH website NOLA, that's KNOWLA. An article by Dr. Susan Blaylock based on the stories in this video will appear in the June 2015 edition of Louisiana Cultural Vistas. I hope you enjoy these stories detailing lives in South Louisiana as we largely embraced air conditioning. However, the storytellers also lament the loss of freedom to play outside, unattended by adults, the long, comforting hours on front porches with friends and family. Listen to them describe the sounds of nature, of mothers calling children home from play, of church bells and mill whistles. Folks found a myriad of methods for cooling off, soaking feet in buckets of ice water to swimming in the artesian pools of Abita Springs. When window units first arrived in homes and public buildings, folks happily adapted. Finally, we hear of the shock of doing without air conditioning after Hurricane Katrina, in the midst of devastation and the sweltering heat of late August of 2005. I'm Dr. Susan Blaylock, the discussion leader for this program. This video would not be possible without the dedication and expertise of the St. Tammany Parish Library staff. Mimi Nothaker, Adult Programs Librarian, wrangled all our disparate details into a coherent program. Benny Bruce's audio-visual work literally made this project a physical entity. Thanks also to Millie Vappy, our grant writer and presenter, who came up with the inspiration for the program and procured Dr. Ray Arsenault for the keynote speaker. Finally, thanks to Brian Boyles at the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities for his support and advice. Please support your Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities and your public library.
My name is Eva Samia Baham. I'm originally from Southwest Louisiana in a little town, Welch, which has the distinction of being about the halfway point between New Orleans and Houston, right off I-10 now. I grew up part-time in the country on my father's 90-acre farm and part-time in town where my mother lived because they didn't stay together. So I'm the youngest of 2 wonderful combined families. And so my childhood was spent playing out on the farm in the summertime, running around barefoot in the fields, running through corn, playing hide and seek, running and playing in the barn, jumping from the top down to the bottom, and just finding a faucet where we could make mud and stand in it and cool our feet. And what that did was it helped us if we stepped in ants. But the house was a big house with a long hall down the middle, and so it was built to be cool. And during the daytime, we were not allowed to play out in the sun during the hottest part of the day. That even in the 50s and 60s, they would tell us the sun was not good for us, that it would hurt your skin and so on. So we would find places like under the tree where they would make a swing for us. And then we would also sit in the hallways or somewhere on the porch in the country. We didn't want to sit there too long because it was harvesting all the time, and they believed that children who were idle too long were going to get in trouble. So we had a lot of things to do, like shucking corn and snapping beans and stuff. So we really wanted to be outside. When it cooled down a little, my father would saddle up a horse that he would let us ride, and we would go riding. And in town, where I lived with my mother, was a swimming pool in the black section of town. It was segregated, as you know, in the 50s and 60s. And so I have the most wonderful memories of going swimming almost every afternoon. It was cooling off, and I think it also got most of us out of our parents' hair. But also had such wonderful times, as so many people can remember, we were acclimated to the heat and the humidity. Didn't make it feel good, but we didn't know air conditioning. But our nights were hot and sticky, and even with screens, worrying about the mosquitoes coming in, so covering our heads with sheets, worrying, hearing the mosquitoes buzzing around. And when we went to bed, but I should back up to say that even before then, the evenings were long, because we ate supper around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and the women would be on the porch swinging, the children would be playing, and if you were a teenager, especially a girl, you had a nice towel that you can kind of swat the mosquitoes off while you were standing outside talking with all your friends. The boys would be running around and playing. The men would stand on the corner and talk to each other in the neighborhood. And so we had a lot of social interaction because we were forced outside until it cooled off enough for us to go to bed. We spent a lot of time in church. And so, as my friend George Weiss said, they had all these fans. But if you were a lady and you got one of these, you were really something. And a teenage girl who could get one, especially from the five and dime, and we would hold it and have it there all week so nobody would touch it. And then on Sunday we could sit there. And we had a lot of programs at our churches on Sunday afternoon. I have no idea why 3 o'clock was a magic hour on Sunday afternoon, but it was hot. And I never understood how the men could wear all those suits. But as my father used to say, a man is not really a man unless he has at least one good suit. And so in all their dignity, they would show up for their afternoon Sunday programs in their suits, and they would sit there and dare not fan if a man could help it. But the women in their white dresses, which was requisite for special programs it seems, would sit and fan. And of course this was the good fan, like this. So we had wonderful times as children, as teenagers, but it didn't mean we didn't want something cooler. Air conditioning for me came going to the stores and the like by the 60s, when we could go to the post office and the like. But it just didn't seem to faze us. Like so many other people, we had fans in the house, eventually sat in front of the fans, tried to get cool that way. But our homes were built so that we could have some sense of cooling. But I think that one of the things that many of us often remember is that we kept our doors open at night. We usually make our children feel really badly about the times today, that they cannot sleep with the doors unlocked because of crime and the like. But many of us, I think, lived even in a big city, in a neighborhood where most people knew each other, in small towns where we knew each other. But also we had screen doors with a little latch. And the purpose of that, anybody could pull it open if they wanted to, but the purpose of it was just to keep the bugs out. And also, when we had company who came from other places to visit us with lots of children, all the children slept on the floor. They made pallets. It was cool. And all the company, the adults, slept in all the beds. And so that it was a big time to have all your cousins and friends come during that time. But lest we think too much about the past and glorify it, then I'm like so many of you, who by happenstance, with my husband and a few other people, were caught here on the North Shore in Slidell after Katrina, during and after Katrina. And we started with lamentations about what it was like to live in the heat, but then we realized why we love air conditioning so much. It was not only hot, but the night was still in ways that couldn't be described in the novels when we hear that said. All the animals were gone. No birds, nothing, no squirrels. It was dark and it was hot. And my husband, who I should say sometimes thinks he's the king of cool, and sometimes I think so too, was unnerved by the heat. And as soon as we can get out, we left. We went to Baton Rouge, and we went straight into the home of a friend who had central air, and we loved it. Thank
you. My name is Jim Long, and I'll begin my story very much at the beginning. I was born in the summer of 1947, and my parents tell me that it was pretty hot, and I was born at Baptist Hospital, and didn't have any air conditioning, of course, or even any heating or any kind of climate control, anything. So they tell me that I came home a bundle of heat rash. From the very beginning, from the very first week of my life, I was nothing but a heat rash. And it really, they told this story over and over and over again. I kept hearing about this. Jimmy was nothing but a bunch of heat rash and red bumps all over his body. My brother was born in January at the same hospital in 1942, 5 years earlier. He came home with pneumonia, so climate control is a good thing in hospitals. So I have a detestation, if that's a word, of heat and humidity, and I trace it to that first week of my life. It lasted for several months, up until the hurricane of September of '47, from what I understand. So I hate hot and humid weather. So I have my memories of, I don't know if I have a title for this, but my memories of air conditioning involve religion in a weird way. And when I started to think about this, the very first time I remember air conditioning was as a result of, it all came from my mother's side of the family, the maternal side of my family, my mother and her father. My mother loved movies. And my father was working, my brother was off at school, it was 1951. She loved Ingrid Bergman. The movie Joan of Arc was playing on Canal Street. She said, Jimmy, we're going to get on the streetcar and we're going to go to Canal Street and we're going to watch this movie Joan of Arc. And yeah, okay, sure, I'm 4 years old. So we go there to the whatever the theater was on Canal Street, and I walk into this wall of coolness after coming into the world as a bunch of heat rash. So I was just thrilled with this. And we sit in this beautiful palatial grand theater, and we're enjoying the movie. And I say a religious experience because it's the story of Joan of Arc. And of course, for me, I'm watching these battle scenes, these churches, these beautiful bishops, and Joan of Arc, of course, is a young girl, and Ingrid Bergman is great in it. My mother is just adoring it and worshiping Ingrid Bergman, so it's all a religious experience. And then I'm getting into this, and I'm sitting next to her. I can still remember my mother sitting here, and I'm to the right of her. And at the very end of the movie, we all know what happens to Joan of Arc. I mean, she doesn't come to a good end. And so it's building up to this and building up to this, and there's torches, and there's people assembling, and there's wood being chopped down, and then there's assembling this stuff, and my eyes are getting bigger and bigger, but I'm cool. I'm in the air-conditioned building, so I'm fine. And then I see her on the stake, and then I realize what's happening. My eyes are like, and then they light this thing, and she goes up in flames, and they see. I went back and I saw this movie maybe 10 years ago because this memory just stuck with me so much. that there's Joan of Arc, this young, beautiful girl, and she's being consumed by flames while I'm cool and comfortable in the Sanger or whatever sphere in New Orleans on Canal Street. And I was so shocked by this juxtaposition of this. I was just so cool and she was burning at the stake. I let out a scream right at the minute when she's going up in flames, and I went underneath the seat. And I was a pretty shy kid when I was, it took a lot to shock me, and so that experience of seeing that image stuck with me forever. And I remember that as a religious thing, and then the air conditioning and the idea of I'm so comfortable, but then this horrible thing happens on the screen. And it didn't ruin me for movies because I'm a big movie fan, but I can fast forward just a little bit. That was 1951. My grandfather, my mother's father, was born in 1898, and he was an engineer by self-taught out of a book that kind of looked like a Bible. It was black leather bound, and it was very worn, and he had learned heating and refrigeration from this book. Never went beyond 4th or 5th grade. He spoke French and English, mostly French as a kid. His name was Philip Bergeron, and he loved engineering and air conditioning. And so before most people, it would be their parents who would introduce them to air conditioning. It was in our family, it was my grandfather who introduced everybody to air conditioning. And on Chippewa Street, I'll never forget, this was 1952 or 53, just shortly after the Joan of Arc scene in my life. And we're on Chippewa Street, and like other people, only one room was air conditioned. And it was my grandparents, not my parents, my grandparents' bedroom. And it too had, it was dark in there, and it was cool, and it was my grandfather said it was a 3/4 ton unit, and he knew the BTUs, and he knew that you needed to keep it at a certain temperature, not to adjust the dial because you threw off the mechanics of the machine, and he knew all the technical parts of it because he had read that book that looked like a Bible that was there, and it was very well worn. We had St. Joseph's missals in our house, but not a Bible as far as I remember, but that to him was his Bible, and he had this unit right above the bed, and it was a 3/4 ton unit, and it was turning and turning and turning. And I remember as a kid being able to go into that room, dark and rumbling with sound, because the air conditioner was just going like crazy. And I snuck in and I got on top of the bed so that I could reach where the air was coming out from. And there were louvers up there that were spinning around, these plastic louvers. And it would come in waves. The cool air would come in waves too. So I remember standing in front of that and feeling the cool air. And my grandmother in this dark room had an altar on the side with her shrines and everything from her Cajun heritage, and it had little candles flickering in the side, and that was the only thing in the room. It was an altar with different lights. Look, it was a replica of like St. Louis Cathedral altar with little lights there. And so I was enjoying this cool air once again with kind of a religious experience for me, because I had this altar there, and it was just like I had gone to heaven. And it had been a long way from the 5 years or 6 years earlier when I came out of Baptist Hospital as pretty much a big red pimple of a heat rash.
My name is Roseann Given, and I'm from this area, Covington. And the name of my story, I just named it this morning to sign up, and I named it Two Quiet Places. And that's the framework for my story, because every time I considered what I would tell my story about, it just went on and on and on. I could write a novel about memories growing up in old Covington. But to keep it down to our time, I framed it to two quiet places, because when I want to do anything creative or be quiet, have quiet time, I need to be alone and I need to be quiet. So in order to do this story, one quiet place was my back porch. On my old house that I've lived in all of my life, it's a 107-year-old house in old Covington, and I started thinking about, well, what was it like before air conditioning? Well, it was not so bad as I recall, and I'm talking about the 50s here, when I was growing up, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And we had a neighborhood, of course, with all the neighbors living in unair-conditioned houses, but we had windows, and there were windows that functioned as windows because they were open almost all the time. The doors were open almost all the time, except for the screens, and of course the windows were screened as well to keep the bugs out. And the wind in the neighborhood, it was really kind of a uniting factor, a defining factor of the neighborhood. Who lives in our neighborhood? Well, we could hear our neighbors because the windows were open. And of course we really couldn't hear all that far away, so, you know, our neighbors were pretty much restricted to the people across the street and a block or two away. The kind of sounds we heard in our neighborhood, and not just us at our house, the whole neighborhood, we were all united by like an unplugged sound system, you know. We all heard the same sounds. And we heard a lot of bells in my neighborhood. We had church bells ringing, we had school bells ringing, and the school bells were handheld, da-ding, da-ding, da-ding. That was a sign for all the children to freeze. And then when Sister whoever saw that all the children were frozen, she would go, da-ding, da-ding, and then we would all file in like this into the classroom. That was a bell. Another bell we heard in our neighborhood were bicycle bells from the kids riding around the neighborhood, not during school, of course. This is weekends when we're out of school. It would go cling, 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 cling. Remember those? And of course we had telephones that rang inside our houses. And when the telephone would ring, it would sound like ring, you know, really loud, ring, and everybody would go, it's for me, get it. Everybody wanted to answer it because it was going to be a friend, most likely a friend, maybe a family member. Not as much fun as friends, but you know, it was somebody we wanted to hear from. And it was always a good thing to hear the phone ringing. And other sounds were a little bit further removed from the home, but not too far removed. There would be a 12 o'clock whistle that blew in town that everybody could hear all over town, and it was time for lunch. Although I'm not sure we called it lunch back then. I think we had breakfast, dinner, and supper. Lunch came in with mom. We didn't have moms either, we had mamas. But that was the 50s. And of course smells came in through the wind as well. You know, if somebody was frying chicken, we knew it. Or if they were boiling crabs, we knew who was boiling crabs. And if they were cooking cabbage, the kids would go, somebody's cooking cabbage. And so we all had more or less the same experience, even though some of our families were, you know, a little bit different from others. But basically, we all had the same experience growing up. And see, where was I going to go with this? Oh yeah, so that was one place I would sit. Now when it really got hot, we would also play in the hose. We just called it, let's play in the hose, and we'd turn on the hose and squirt everybody in our swimsuits. Sometimes we'd turn the hose upward so it would make a fountain. Sometimes we'd just, you know, squirt each other with it. But it did cool things off. And then if we were really hot, we would go to the river, to the park to swim. We'd just put on our swimsuits, grab a towel, and run barefoot to the river. The river was bounded by, the safe part of the river was the park where we were allowed to go, by ourselves, with permission, of course. But we were not allowed to play along the river at large because we don't really know why, but the impression was that it just wasn't safe. It's just not safe to go anywhere along the river. The feeling was there could be strangers, people who weren't from here, transients, hobos. Hobos coming out of the 30s and 40s may not have been considered as romantic as they were in the 60s, you know. They were people that weren't necessarily trustworthy and not necessarily safe. They might have been escaped criminals on the river. The river was not necessarily a place that would be safe. So the 60s came in, and when the 60s came in, as we all know, a lot of things changed. And air conditioning is the subject of the day, so air conditioning came into our community and our town, and the neighborhoods changed, the population changed. People they moved here from Florida, they moved here from Iowa, they moved here from all over the country, largely because the airport opened in New Orleans, and pilots moved over our way, and in the pharmaceutical drug salesmen and oil company people who weren't really from here. Where all these people come from? They have more than one car, they have televisions, they have swimming pools, they have ranch-style houses, and they now live not in our neighborhood, they live in a subdivision, they have a country club, you know, this is all happening in the 60s. And of course they did have air conditioning, and it was like you go into their house and the cold air would just fall out. And it was a big change. And one thing that reminds me, I got the idea about the 60s and the river from going to my second quiet place to think about my story, and that is the river. If I want to be quiet, if I want to be alone, and my porch is not quiet enough, I go to the river for quiet time. So I was at the river, and I started thinking about the river and the air conditioning. I came up with the 60s. And the people who came into the air conditioning generation were not afraid of the river. They got out there, they brought their boats and their skis and their, and speedboats and canoes, and they got out there and partied on the river. So that's pretty much the end of my story, and history is going on.
My name is Peggy Oscar, and I grew up at 2458 Athos Street in Gentilly in New Orleans. We lived in a raised house, wooden floors. Ceilings weren't real high, but they were higher than 8 feet. And we didn't have air conditioning for a long time. But what I remember most was we had the attic fan, and how wonderful that was when we got that, I would say 58, 59. That was just great, that cooler. But even with the attic fan, I found it rather hot at night to sleep. So what I would do, this was just something that I thought of doing. When my mother did find out, she thought it wasn't a good idea, but I would get up in the middle of the night, go into the bathroom, put my feet in water, and go back to bed with wet feet. However, it helped me stay cool because it was very humid and hot. And so when we did the attic fan helped, but when we finally did get an air conditioner, we were like other people who it only went into the parents' room, and it was a little, I remember the unit, a little Mathis unit. That was the name of the company. Had a beautiful mahogany front, so it was supposed to kind of match their bedroom furniture, actually. And they had the air conditioning, and we didn't. The rest of the house didn't. However, I think my dad just kind of felt sorry for the girls in the bedroom across the hall. And at some point he decided he was going to help us out. So there were 2 vents on each side, and you could adjust them up or down or whatever. He left one open. He took plastic bags from the cleaners, taped it to one of the other vents, and made a duct that went to the top of his ceiling, across the little hallway, and into our bedroom. So at night, he could close the doors to the hallway and the bathroom and leave our door open. And that little bit, that one little vent, really kept us cool. And I was so thankful for that. I didn't care that the boys in the other bedroom on the other side of the house had air conditioning or not. It just wasn't necessary for me. But it was really a wonderful thing to have, and I did appreciate it. I don't remember, I think I was already away at college when they finally got air conditioning, the central kind. One of the first air-conditioned places I remember was a little drugstore on the corner of St. Roch and Prentice called Roche's Drugstore, and they had a soda fountain. So if you had a dime, you could sit on those little stools, and as long as they would let you, and you could make that root beer, that Barks root beer could take a really long time to drink. But eventually you'd have to go. So the other thing you would have to do would have to be to walk to a snowball stand. I was surprised nobody mentioned the snowball stand, because that was part of my life. In the summers, you always went to snowball stands. Well, one was a little bit further away, 6 or so blocks, so that'd be like a 12-block walk. If you were playing all day, got a snowball, came home, you might come back with what we called grandma chains. Did anybody ever have a grandma chain? It's the dirt that got caught in your neck. So when you got a grandma chain, you had to go in and take a bath. And this Saturday, particular Saturday afternoon, when my mom said, "You better go take a bath," I went into the bathtub. I was, maybe 8 years old. I could do that by myself. Took my bath, came out, after toweled off. And I didn't hear anything in the house, not a word. For a split second, I was like panicked, like, where did everybody go? And then I heard the noises. The people talking outside, the kids running around playing, the lawnmowers. Everybody was outside. And that's what usually happened on a Saturday, late afternoon. The whole community, the whole neighborhood, everybody was outside playing, talking, working, jump roping, whatever. And you heard those noises. But inside it was pretty quiet. I got outside and I got to play too. That's all.
I'm Lil Butler, and my story starts when I was a very young child. I was born in New Orleans, but I didn't live there very long. My dad was killed, and I was sent to live with my dad's mother and her husband. And this was on a sugarcane plantation that is between Lockport and Raceland, Louisiana. And so these people lived in houses that, I think we would classify them as maybe shacks. They were pretty much well designed, but it was very hot because there were like 4 rooms, and the large living room had 2 windows to them, and then the front door, and there was a large front porch, but the porch was not enclosed. So the people would sit out there late in the afternoon and fan themselves with cardboard, some type of whatever, rags, and wiping the sweat off their face. But this is where they would sit and communicate. My grandfather was a deacon in the church that we attended, and when he became a minister, well, they always had people come into the house. They had their meetings and, church meetings and Bible studies. And then we had 2 bedrooms in this house, and there was a window in each bedroom, and the kitchen was like the living area, where you ate, the dining area, kitchen area, 2 windows, and then there were doors like across the hall, and left those doors open so that the wind could sort of blow through. That's how we would get some air. So we did a lot of drinking water, and believe it or not, we did have lemonade at that time, but it was very difficult getting the water because this house, we didn't have running water, and it was like a cistern. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen that, but the cistern is right to the right of the house, and the water, when it rained, went into the cistern, and so it had to be boiled and then cooled. And sometime during the week, somebody would come by in the ice truck, and they would buy blocks of ice to put in this little ice box that they kept. And when the ice would run out, and it always did, my grandfather had to go to the ice house to get some blocks of ice. And so that is how we did. I was pretty much sheltered, believe it or not, although we didn't have very much. But I was not allowed to run out too much. Like I say, ride bicycles. The children at that time, they had bicycles, and they could ride up and down in that area on their bicycles. But my grandmother would always say to me, go in there and practice your piano lessons, believe it or not. We always had a piano in the house, even then. And my grandma's the type person who just saved. If she made $1, she saved 10 cents out of that. So eventually, we were able to move to the city of Thibodeau, where they purchased and had a house built in the city of Thibodeau. And that house, of course, there was more rooms, more windows, bathroom, running water, and all of that. But we still did not have air conditioning. And we had these little portable fans that just moved around from room to room and to help us out. And I should get back to, I'm going to go back to living in this area in Lafourche Parish. That's where it was, Lafourche Parish. I need to tell you about the church that we attended because we had 3 services, 11 o'clock service, and then we had Bible study at 6 o'clock, and then we had the late service. And I can remember those little funeral home fans that they passed out, and they, of course, mostly to the women and the girls. So we'd be so happy. I'm happy for the minister to finish whatever he had to say so that I could get home and get comfortable and get out of those clothes. You see, during that time, ladies and the girls, well, men dressed in their suits as well, but ladies and girls, my grandma would lay our clothes out on Saturday night. We had to dress. I mean, we had dressy dresses, long cotton stockings, or whatever the knowledge were that we wore. We had to wear a hat, and we had to wear gloves. And that's just how we went to church. It didn't matter about the heat. So we'd be very happy to get home and get out of all of that. And especially the older women, because they got all the other stuff that I cannot mention. But they wore that, you know. So luckily, years ago, after that, in the early 60s, I married this wonderful man from Madisonville, met him through a roommate of mine. We were in college together, and I met him, and so he had built this home not too very far out of the town of Madisonville, and it had a lot of trees, beautiful, and I love trees. Oak trees, pine trees, and all type of fruit trees and everything. And so we had, in this house, a screen porch. And on that screen porch, we had a swing, which I adored, and a bench, a chair, and a day bed. So the day bed was where his parents sometimes took naps during the day, and sometime at night he slept on that day bed. But I was always a scary cat. My grandma's always called me scary cat. I was almost afraid of everything. And during the 60s, a lot of things were going on. And I was afraid to sleep outside. So my husband and I would be in the bedroom, and he wanted to sleep with all the windows open, of course, because it was hot. And he said, if you sleep with the windows open, you'll get some breeze coming from the trees. So I had a difficult time with that. So while he slept, I napped on and off, but it was very hot. We did quite well with the air later on, because we were able to get the window fans, and then you get the little air conditioners, that you stuck in the windows. And then finally, I think it was like in the 70s, the 70s, we got the AC units going. And right now, with a hurricane, something happened, a power outage or whatever, you don't want to be anywhere near me. That AC goes off. I mean, because I am not a good person, and I'm on the phone, and I'm yelling and screaming, and when is I'm going to get some air? But during the time when I was younger and growing up, and all this time, it was okay. Looked like that wasn't the worst thing in the world for me. There were so many other things that I feared. And so the air, the heat, was not a really big problem for me. So I just used my fan, rags, wipe the sweat off my face, or whatever that was. And if I woke up the next day and I'm alive, I was fine.
My name is Kate DeSoms, and I have a story that I'm going to call Hot, Hotter, and Hottest. And when I was little, growing up in New Orleans, down by the river where Carrollton meets St. Charles, it got pretty hot, but we worked around it. We worked with the heat. And what we would do, even as kids, we had the sense to go out. We were out a lot, but we would rev it up in the mornings when it was still cooler, come in the middle of the day and read, and go back out in the later afternoon and stay out till dusk. But the things that we came up with to keep cool as children, for example, water gun fights. Oh, we had marvelous water gun fights. And then there was the hose bath army. And it got ferocious, but boy, it kept you cool. And my father would get involved in that. And he was really good with that hose. Now, that's the first part, but fast forward now to early adulthood, moving to Abita Springs. This part is called Hotter. We were naive enough, my husband and I, we had a 3-year-old boy, and I was pregnant with my daughter. And we were naive enough to think, oh, we're moving to Abita Springs. We won't need air conditioning, which we were really trying to make ourselves feel better because we couldn't afford it. Well, that old house that we moved into was hot, and we moved in the middle of the summer. And around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I would be about ready to just give it up. But one of the few people that we knew in Abita Springs had, and here it comes again, an artesian well pool. And that pool never warmed up because it was not in the sunshine. It was under these huge oak trees, and it was truly ice cold. And around 3 o'clock, I would jump in that pool, 7 months pregnant, and be reborn, literally. To this day, my daughter cannot stand to go into a pool that's cold. Now, fast forward, that was hotter. We had hotter. Now we get to the ultimate. Fast forward to Katrina. And for reasons that I won't go into, it's complicated, I had to remain in Abita for Hurricane Katrina, 2005. Yeah, that's right. And all the trees along the side of the house and way into the back, they were down. And the house was spared more or less. It was habitable. But there was the trees, the few trees that remained, there were no leaves left. And it was the hottest that I ever have experienced. And part of it was not knowing when the heck I was going to be able to get out of there. But at night, I would just lie in this heat. And in the daytime, the way that I survived was I ran around in the lightest cotton nightgown that I had, nothing else on, and filled up my old Victorian tub. Now, I was by myself at this point, with water, cold water, and I would get in that thing about 10 times a day until 5 or 6 days later when my son was able to get in with a load of gasoline and get us out. So I'm going to hold up the picture that shows what I looked like running around in the backyard with that nightgown. And that's how I survived. That was the absolute hottest I have ever survived. And the lesson there is that despite air conditioning, you never know when suddenly less summer might become suddenly more summer again.
My name is Ida Thomas James. My grandmother, who I'm going to talk about, name was Ida Harvey Thomas Bell, and I was named after her. She and I had a very special relationship. This is her home, and I spent a lot of time there. My parents lived just on the other block. She was on one end, and we were on the other end. She is my dad's mother. Everyone called her either Aunt Ida, Miss Ida, you know, Sister Bell, but we all called her Momo, and that's spelled M-A-M-E-A-U-X, Momo. Momo's yard was a bountiful seasonal snack bar. She had something growing there all the time. I've never figured that out. But as you look at the picture, there's a pecan tree as you enter her yard on the left. There was a persimmon tree on the right. Around her porch were hydrangeas and gladiolas. When you would go there, if you went around to the right side, there was a huge fig tree, which I don't like figs. There was a cherry tree. There was kumquats, pomegranates, muscadines. There were cherries, the little tiny cherries growing. There was constantly something there for you to pick. If there was nothing blooming, there was something blooming or growing. She had a summer garden, a winter garden, a spring garden. There was always something growing on the left side of her house. But Momo's porch is what I want to talk about. After my mother would get off from work and my dad and everybody would be in the neighborhood, everybody's off from work, the kids are home from school, and we would eat, I know, before dark. So whatever time it was, I don't know, but that kitchen had to be clean before dark. So And after we would do all of that and sitting around or playing outside, my mother would say, I'm going down to Miss Ida's. And she would go. If she was gone too long, we would all be at Momo's. So that determined how long she was gone, and I doubt if it was very long. We would just say, we all will go to Momo's house. And when we would get there, Miss Doris would be there, Miss Clyde, Miss Callie. There was always other ladies on there. And if you look at the picture, you see a chair that's on the right side of the door, and that's where Momo would sit. And the children would play in the yard. You never were allowed to come near the porch, you know, where the adults were talking. That was not, you did not sit among grown-ups while they were talking. The children would play in the yard. We would all play, run around, come up with a game. But my grandmother had the best clover patch you would ever see. It was, and she always left it because we would roll around in the clover patch. The girls would pick the flowers. I don't know why, there was always clover flowers in there, and make wreaths, make bracelets, make necklaces out of the flowers by plaiting the stems together. If we really got ingenious and had a long time, we'd make almost a rope to play with, but we never got long enough. But we would play in the clovers, the boys would wrestle around, and eventually we'd end up, as it got dark, hide and seek. And my grandmother, sitting on that side of the porch, could look, okay, you chaps, come on back around here. You know, that kind of thing. It was a warning like, okay, you know, it's time. And it's amazing that you knew it was time. The night was wearing down and we were getting tired and bored. But before we would leave, they would start a smoke. Remember the mosquito smoke? She'd bring out that old bucket and get the rags and start the smoke going so that they could finish their conversation. And when the smoke was started, we knew she was also going to bring out some tea cakes. And she made the best tea cakes, and we all got one tea cake. We'd sit, go back over by the clovers, and we would lie there in the clovers eating our tea cakes and start making up stories and things like that. And eventually start getting sleepy. And we would try to make ourselves stay awake, watch the stars, look for constellations, come up with who can find this and who can find that and who can recognize this noise, what's that noise, and that kind of thing and then catch the lightning bugs. It's probably why there are no lightning bugs anymore. So we would do all these things to try to stay awake, and then eventually you'd hear someone say, well, it's time to go, you know, and then everybody would start saying goodnight. And we'd start hide and seek all over again, running down the road, and I'm gonna walk you peace way home, I'll walk you peace way home, and back and forth we would go. So I remember my grandmother's yard as being the place to be on summer nights.
Hi, my name is Susan Blaylock, and I'm going to tell you a story about air conditioning that was almost fatal to me as a child. And I kind of promised this earlier, a few weeks ago. Back in the day, my dad came back from Korea, and he had been in the Korean War, and I was about, 8 or 9. And we sold our clapboard house that was raised off the ground with a porch and all that wonderful stuff for a brand new tract house. And it was on a slab. It had Anderson windows that open outward. And we didn't have air conditioning, but my parents discovered the window unit. So they had a window unit put in their master bedroom, and then closed the door, and we were not allowed in there because we would allow the air conditioning out. Don't let the air conditioning out. So they keep the door closed. They were nice and cool, and the rest of us, my brother and I, were, you know, burning up in the rest of the house. So this story revolves around having my best friend Twinkle over for a sleepover. And my dad was off at a reserve meeting. You know, he was still in the service in the reserves. So he was gone, and for some reason my mom allowed me to have my best friend Twinkle over to spend the night. And we were a very mischievous pair. So we're in my bedroom with the door closed, and my mother's in her air-conditioned bedroom with this thing going rrr, 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 and the door closed. So we decided after a couple of hours of whispering and carrying on that we needed to up the ante a little bit. So we opened the windows and we climbed out the windows out into the yard. And we'd seen lots of World War II movies, and I liked World War II movies and cowboy movies, and she liked scary movies. So we would go out and enact movies at night, you know, shooting the enemy out of trees and, you know, carrying on. So we're outside, you know, scurrying around in the bushes, shooting the Japanese out of the trees, and I discover a frog. So I get this frog, and I start chasing Twinkle around the yard to throw the frog at her. And of course, my mother hadn't heard any of this, right, because she's back in her air-conditioned room. Well, once I hit Twinkle with the frog and she screamed, my mother heard something. So she gets out, opens her door, goes into my brother's room, he wasn't there, and got his .22. And she comes down the hall to take care of business. And thank goodness she thought to look in the bedroom, and neither Twinkle nor I were in our beds. So she lit out for the front yard, just boiling mad. And both of us were punished for weeks because my mother thought she was going to kill her daughter and the neighbor down the street. And I was sent away to boarding school the next year, and that's how I wound up in Covington. So, thank you.